A man who hasn't spoken his daughter's name in 4 years sits in a dying roadside diner, drinking black coffee with hands that still remember how to kill. He doesn't know that 200 miles south, someone has been photographing a teenage girl who shares his jawline. He doesn't know that an 8-year-old runaway is about to slide into the booth across from him and say 9 words that will burn his entire world to the ground. And he doesn't know that the ghost he buried in a desert 15 years ago just crawled out of its grave. This story will break you. Stay until the very end. You'll understand why. If you're watching right now, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's ride. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but Cole Mercer hadn't noticed. He sat in the corner booth of a diner called Mabel's that hadn't updated its menu since the Clinton administration. His leather jacket draped across the cracked vinyl seat beside him, his helmet resting on the table like a skull he'd carried in from the desert. Outside, Route 17 stretched empty in both directions under a sky the color of old concrete. His Harley ticked and cooled in the gravel lot, the only vehicle besides a rusted pickup that probably belonged to whoever was frying eggs behind the counter. He was 43 years old and looked like every mile had been uphill. The scar that ran from his left temple down past his ear had faded to a pale ridge of tissue that caught the fluorescent light. His knuckles were permanently swollen from a decade of things he didn't talk about. His eyes, gunmetal gray, deep-set, permanently narrowed against either sunlight or memory, moved in a slow sweep across the room every 90 seconds without him deciding to do it. Old training. The kind you can't unlearn because it was beaten into your nervous system in places where forgetting meant dying. Cole Mercer had been a Marine. Force Recon. 3 deployments before he was 26. He'd come home with a Purple Heart, a shattered femur held together with titanium pins, and a silence so heavy that his wife stopped trying to reach him after the 2nd year. He'd come home to a daughter who was 3 years old and afraid of him. That was the wound no surgeon could close. The waitress, 60 maybe, with a name tag that read Donna and eyes that had seen too many empty highways, refilled his cup without asking. She glanced at the tattoos visible above his collar, the Black Horizon rider's patch folded into the jacket beside him, and said nothing. Small towns along Route 17 had learned decades ago that men who rode alone and sat in corners either wanted silence or trouble, and the smart money was always on giving them the first, so you never had to deal with the second. Cole wrapped both hands around the mug and stared at the steam rising from the black surface. He hadn't slept in a real bed in 11 days. Hadn't spoken to another human being in 3. He was riding from nowhere to nowhere because standing still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering a little girl's voice asking her mother why Daddy's hands were always shaking. Riley would be 15 now. He didn't know what she looked like. Didn't know her favorite color or whether she played sports, or if she'd inherited his stubborn jaw or her mother's careful eyes. The custody hearing had lasted 45 minutes. His ex-wife's attorney had introduced the arrest record, the psychiatric evaluation, the incident report from the VA, where Cole had put his fist through a window during a flashback and nearly severed the tendons in his right hand. The judge hadn't even looked at him when she ruled. Full custody to the mother, supervised visitation only, which Michelle had quietly made impossible by moving 3 times in 2 years without forwarding an address. He'd stopped looking after the 3rd move. Not because he stopped caring, because he looked at himself in the mirror one morning, bloodshot eyes, 3-day stubble, knuckles wrapped in gauze from a bar fight he barely remembered, and realized that the kindest thing he could do for his daughter was disappear. That was 4 years ago. The bell above the diner door chimed. Cole's eyes moved to the entrance without his head turning. Peripheral scan, automatic, the way a predator tracks movement without revealing attention. A woman in a stained coat walked in, pulling a child by the wrist. The child was small, maybe 8, with tangled brown hair and a bruise on her forearm that was the exact wrong shade of yellow-green. The woman yanked the girl toward a booth near the window, sat her down hard, and walked to the counter without looking back. Cole watched. The bruise was 3 days old. The girl's eyes were too wide, too watchful, scanning the room the same way Cole did, not with training, but with the desperate hypervigilance of a child who had learned that adults were weather systems, unpredictable and violent. She sat perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap, making herself as small as possible. Cole looked away. Told himself it wasn't his business. Told himself he'd spent 20 years learning that the world was full of broken things he couldn't fix. He drank his coffee. The woman at the counter was arguing with Donna about the price of a sandwich. Her voice was sharp and climbing, the kind of escalation that came from whatever chemical was making her pupils too wide for the diner's dim lighting. The argument got louder. Donna's expression went flat. The woman slammed a crumpled bill on the counter and stormed toward the restroom, leaving the girl alone in the booth. 30 seconds passed. The girl slid out of her seat. She moved across the diner with the practiced silence of a child accustomed to not being noticed. No scraping of shoes, no bumping of furniture, just a small shadow gliding between tables until she reached Cole's booth and sat down across from him as if she'd been invited. Cole's hands tightened around the mug. The girl stared at him with enormous dark eyes that held no fear, which was somehow worse than if she'd been terrified. Children who aren't afraid of strangers have usually been failed by every familiar face in their lives. "Wrong booth, kid," Cole said quietly. She didn't move. Her eyes dropped to the Black Horizon rider's patch visible on his jacket, then came back up to his face. She leaned forward across the table. "The man with the snake tattoo asked about your daughter." Cole's entire body went still. Not tense, not startled, still. The way a coiled spring goes still in the instant before it releases. The coffee mug in his hands could have been welded there. His pupils contracted, his breathing dropped to the shallow, controlled rhythm that his body defaulted to in combat. "What did you say?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "Two men. At the motel off exit 14. I was sleeping in the truck bed next to theirs. They didn't know I was there." She swallowed. "One of them had a big snake tattoo going up his neck. All black. He kept saying your name, Cole Mercer. He said he needed to find your daughter." The world outside the diner windows hadn't changed. The sky was still gray. Route 17 was still empty. The grease still popped on the flat top behind the counter, and the fluorescent lights still hummed their tired electric hymn. But inside Cole Mercer's chest, something had cracked open like a frozen lake breaking apart in spring. Sudden, violent, irreversible. Only 3 people in the world knew he had a daughter. Michelle, who had changed her last name and her phone number and built a wall of silence between Cole and everything he'd lost. Danny Vickers, his former spotter in Force Recon, who had been killed by an IED outside Fallujah in 2009. And Silas Voss. The name surfaced like a body rising from deep water. Silas Voss, the operative who had served alongside Cole's unit during a classified operation that officially never happened, the man who had accessed their intelligence, sold their positions to the enemy, and disappeared into the chaos while 3 Marines bled out in a burning compound. Silas Voss was supposed to be dead. The official report said he'd been killed in a firefight during extraction, but no body was ever recovered, and in Cole's experience, men without graves had a habit of walking back into your life at the worst possible moment. "What's your name?" Cole asked, his voice careful now, controlled. "Harper." "Harper, where's your family?" The girl looked toward the restroom where the woman had disappeared. The look said everything. That woman was as close to family as Harper had, and she was neither close nor family. "She's not, Harper stopped, reconsidered. The calculation in her eyes was too old for her face. "She watches me sometimes, when she remembers." Cole felt something turn over inside his chest, a hot, sick anger that he recognized because he'd carried it since the day the judge told him he wasn't fit to raise his own child. The system had a name for kids like Harper: foster care, temporary placement, at-risk youth. Names that sounded like solutions but functioned as erasure, turning a living, breathing, terrified child into a case number that could be filed, transferred, lost, and forgotten. "The men," Cole said. "You said there were 2. Harper nodded. The one with the snake was in charge. The other one was younger, scared of him. They had a photograph. She hesitated. "I took it." Cole stared at her. "You took their photograph. They left the truck open. I grabbed it when they went inside." She reached into the pocket of her oversized hoodie and pulled out a creased, slightly bent 4x6 photograph. She placed it on the table between them. Cole looked down. The photo showed a teenage girl walking out of a school, backpack over one shoulder, hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was mid-step, unaware she was being watched. Her face turned slightly toward the camera in a way that captured the line of her jaw, the set of her mouth, the particular way she squinted against the afternoon sun. Cole hadn't seen his daughter in 4 years, but he knew that face. He knew it the way you know your own heartbeat, not because you think about it, but because it's the thing that keeps you alive even when you're not paying attention. Riley. Someone had been photographing Riley, recently. The shadows in the image were short, midday, spring or early fall. The school behind her looked suburban, well-maintained. There were other students visible in the background, but Riley was centered in the frame. This wasn't an accident. This was surveillance. His hand was shaking. He set the photograph down and pressed his palm flat against the table until the tremor stopped. "When did you hear them talking?" he asked. "Last night. Maybe 2 in the morning. Where's exit 14 from here?" 20 minutes. Maybe less." The bathroom door opened. The woman in the stained coat emerged, wiping her nose with the back of her hand, her pupils even wider than before. She scanned the diner, saw Harper sitting with Cole, and her face twisted into something between panic and fury. "Harper, get over here!" Harper flinched but didn't move. The woman crossed the diner in 3 fast strides and grabbed the girl's arm hard enough to leave marks. "I told you not to talk to people. I told you—" "Let go of her arm." Cole's voice was low, not loud. The kind of quiet that carries more threat than a shout because it suggests the speaker has already decided what happens next and is simply offering one final chance to avoid it. The woman looked at Cole, looked at his size, his scars, the absolute stillness of his posture, and some survival instinct buried beneath the chemicals firing through her bloodstream told her to release the child's arm. She did. "She's my responsibility," the woman said, but the words came out thin and defensive. "I'm watching her for her mother." "Where's her mother?" "That's none of your Where's her mother?" The woman's mouth opened and closed. She looked at Harper. Harper looked at the table. The silence answered louder than words. Cole pulled a $20 bill from his jacket and set it on the table. "Buy the kid some food. A real meal, not whatever you were going to split with her from the dollar menu." He looked at Harper. "You did the right thing, telling me what you heard." Harper met his eyes. And that look was something Cole recognized from the mirror. The exhausted hope of someone who has been invisible for so long that being seen feels like a hallucination. He stood up, grabbed his jacket and helmet, walked out of the diner into the gray morning where his Harley waited like a dark promise in the gravel lot. He sat on the bike for a full minute without starting the engine. Riley. Someone was hunting Riley. He pulled out a phone he rarely used, a burner, prepaid, the kind of phone carried by men who understood that being findable was a luxury they couldn't afford. He dialed a number from memory. It rang 4 times. "Yeah." The voice on the other end was gravel and smoke. Dex Harlow, vice president of the Black Horizon Riders. 61 years old, Vietnam-era veterans kid, retired pipe fitter with a beard like steel wool and hands that could tear a phone book in half. He'd ridden with Cole for 9 years and never once asked about his past. That was the currency of the club. Not questions, but presence. You showed up, you rode, you stood when standing mattered. Everything else was silence. "It's Cole." "I know who it is. You sound like hell." "I need a meet. Full table. Tonight." Silence on the line. A full table meant every patched member within riding distance. It meant something had gone wrong in a way that couldn't be fixed by one man alone. "Where?" Dex asked. "The compound. I'll be there by dark." "Cole." Dex's voice dropped half a register. "What happened?" Cole looked at the photograph in his hand. His daughter's face. Taken by someone who had no right to see her, no right to know her name, no right to stand close enough to capture the way the light fell across her cheekbone. Someone found Riley. The line went quiet for 3 seconds. Dex knew the name. Not because Cole had told him the story, he never had, not fully, but because one night 3 years ago, Cole had gotten drunk enough on cheap bourbon at the compound to say his daughter's name out loud before going silent for the rest of the night. Dex had never mentioned it again. He didn't need to. He'd been carrying that name in his memory ever since, waiting for the night it became relevant. Tonight was that night. "I'll make the calls," Dex said. "Every man. No exceptions." Cole hung up and started the engine. The Harley roared to life beneath him, the vibration traveling up through the frame and into his bones like a second heartbeat, louder and angrier than the one in his chest. He pulled onto Route 17 heading west, the wind cutting against his face cold enough to make his eyes water, and for the first time in 4 years he wasn't running from something. He was running toward it. The Black Horizon Riders compound sat at the end of a dirt road 7 miles outside a town called Ashford that most maps had forgotten. The property was 12 acres of scrub pine and packed earth surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire that nobody had ever been stupid enough to test. The main building was a converted auto shop, concrete block walls, steel roll-up doors, a flat roof stained with decades of weather. Inside, a bar made from reclaimed barnwood, a pool table with a torn felt surface, mismatched chairs, and a long oak table where the club held church. By the time Cole arrived, 6 bikes were already lined up outside. He could read the rides like a roster. Dex's battered Road King, Reno Castillo's blacked-out Street Glide, the stripped-down Dyna belonging to Patch Sullivan, and 3 others belonging to men who'd driven through the night, because when the call went out, you answered. That was the only rule that mattered. He walked in and the room went quiet. Not the awkward silence of interruption, but the focused silence of men who understood that what came next was going to cost something. Dex stood behind the bar with his arms crossed. Reno sat at the table cleaning a knife that didn't need cleaning, his dark eyes tracking Cole's entrance with the measured assessment of a man who'd spent 20 years as an Army Ranger before trading his uniform for leather. Patch was in the corner nursing a beer, his prosthetic left hand resting on the table. He'd lost the original in a motorcycle accident 6 years ago, but still rode better one-handed than most men did with 2. "Sit down," Dex said. Cole sat. He placed the photograph in the center of the table. "This is my daughter. Her name is Riley. She's 15 years old and I haven't seen her since she was 11. He paused. Let the words settle. "Someone has been watching her, photographing her. An 8-year-old girl overheard 2 men at a motel discussing how to find her, and one of those men is someone I thought died 15 years ago in a desert I'm not supposed to talk about." Nobody spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was loaded, pressurized, the silence of men calculating what the next hours were going to require. Reno stopped cleaning his knife. "Name?" "Silas Voss." The name landed like a round hitting a steel plate. Dex's jaw tightened. He'd never served with Cole, but he'd been in the life long enough to know that certain names carried weight measured in blood. "What does he want?" Patch asked. "I don't know yet, but he wants her specifically, not me. Her." Cole looked around the table. "Which means either she has something he needs, or she's leverage for something I haven't figured out." Dex leaned forward. "Where is she?" "I don't know." The admission hung in the air like gun smoke. A father who didn't know where his daughter lived. A father who had voluntarily made himself a stranger to the person who mattered most. Every man at that table understood it, not because they agreed with the choice, but because each of them carried their own version of the same wound. Marriages destroyed by deployments. Children who stopped answering calls. Families that became photographs in wallets that never got opened. "I need to find her before he does," Cole said. "And I need to find her without Michelle knowing I'm looking, because if Michelle finds out I'm anywhere near Riley's life, she'll move again, and I'll lose the trail permanently." Reno slid his knife into its sheath. "What about the girl, the one who heard the conversation?" "Harper, 8 years old, currently with a woman who's chemically incapable of keeping her safe. I saw track marks and pupils the size of dimes." "You left her there?" The question hit Cole like a fist to the sternum, because the answer was yes. He had left her there. He'd left an 8-year-old child in the care of a woman who couldn't care for herself because he had prioritized his own daughter's survival over a stranger's child's safety, and the math of that decision was the kind that corroded your soul no matter which way the numbers fell. "I'm going back for her," Cole said, "but Riley comes first." "Both come first," Dex said quietly. "That's the whole point of this table." It was the closest Dex had ever come to correcting Cole, and the correction landed because it was true. The Black Horizon Riders didn't rank children by blood relation. A kid in danger was a kid in danger, and the Brotherhood existed for the moments when the normal world, with its caseworkers and its judges and its systems built from good intentions and bureaucratic paralysis, failed to do the one thing that mattered, protect the ones who couldn't protect themselves. All right, Cole said. Both. Dex nodded to Reno. Take Patch and one prospect. Go back to that diner. Find the girl. Don't spook the woman. If she runs with Harper, we lose the only witness who can identify Voss. Reno stood without a word. Patch drained his beer and followed. The prospect, a young rider named Watts, who had been sitting against the wall trying not to breathe too loudly, scrambled to his feet and fell in behind them. 3 men walked out into the night, and the sound of their boots on the concrete floor was a kind of language. Steady, deliberate, inevitable. Cole turned to Dex. I need to find Michelle. You know where she was last? Tucson, 2 years ago. But she moves, changes names sometimes. She's terrified of me and she's smart enough to stay gone. She's not terrified of you, Dex said. She's terrified of what comes looking for you. And she's right to be. Cole said nothing because there was nothing to say. The truth was a blade that cut cleanly and left no room for argument. Dex pulled a laptop from behind the bar, an ancient ThinkPad held together with duct tape and stubbornness. I'll make some calls. I know people who find people. But Cole. He waited until Cole met his eyes. When you find Riley, what are you going to say? Whatever keeps her alive. That's not what I asked. Cole stared at the scarred surface of the table. There were cigarette burns and knife marks and water rings from 1,000 beers consumed by men with nowhere else to go. The table was ugly and honest and indestructible, like everything in this room. I don't know what I'm going to say, he admitted. I don't know if she'll even recognize me. Dex nodded slowly. Then figure it out before you're standing in front of her, because walking back into your kid's life after 4 years of silence is the kind of thing you don't get to do twice. You show up wrong, you lose her for good. Cole picked up the photograph. Riley's face, mid-stride, unaware, alive. Somewhere in a town he didn't know, attending a school he couldn't name, living a life he had no part in. And somewhere out there, a dead man was looking for her. Cole slid the photograph into the inside pocket of his jacket, next to his chest, where the warmth of his body would press against the image of the daughter he'd abandoned to protect. He walked outside into the cold night. The compound was quiet, except for the wind moving through the pine trees and the distant rumble of Reno's bike disappearing down the dirt road toward exit 14. Toward Harper. Cole lit a cigarette and leaned against the cinderblock wall. His hands were steady now. Not because the fear had gone. The fear was enormous, a black ocean rising inside his chest, but because the fear had direction. Undirected fear was paralysis. Directed fear was fuel. He exhaled smoke into the darkness and made himself a promise he had no right to make. He was going to find Riley. He was going to put himself between his daughter and whatever was coming for her. And if Silas Voss was alive, if the ghost from that desert had crawled back into the world with Cole's daughter's photograph in his hand, then Cole was going to finish what should have been finished 15 years ago in a burning compound 7,000 miles from here. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. His phone buzzed. A text from Reno. 3 words. Girl is gone. Cole stared at the screen. The wind cut through his jacket and found every scar on his body, every old wound that had never fully healed, and for one long moment the night felt like it was swallowing him whole. Harper was gone. The only person who could identify the man hunting his daughter had vanished into the dark. And somewhere out there, Silas Voss was already ahead of him. Cole called Reno back within 10 seconds. The line rang once. Talk to me. Diner's dark. Claude, sign up. No cars in the lot. Donna, the waitress, she's still inside cleaning up. Says the woman and the girl left about 2 hours after you did. Woman was on the phone with someone, got agitated, dragged the kid out without finishing the food you paid for. Reno paused. Donna said the woman looked scared. Not high scared, genuinely terrified. Cole pressed his thumb against his temple hard enough to feel the pulse underneath. Which direction? Donna didn't see, but there's a gas station a quarter-mile east with cameras. Patches over there now sweet-talking the night clerk. And the motel? Exit 14? Watts checked it. Room's been cleared. No snake tattoo. No truck. Manager says 2 men checked in yesterday afternoon, paid cash. Checked out around noon today. No names. No plates. Cole closed his eyes. The darkness behind his eyelids was not restful. It was populated with the faces of men he'd failed to save in rooms that smelled like burning diesel and copper. And now his daughter's face had joined them, centered and bright and terrifyingly still. "Stay on it," Cole said. "Find that girl." He hung up and walked back inside. Dex was at the laptop, reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, the blue-white glow of the screen casting shadows that made his face look carved from granite. Two other members had arrived while Cole was outside. Birch, a wiry former combat medic who never spoke above a whisper, and Taller, a massive Samoan with sleeve tattoos and a voice like a cello. They sat at the table drinking coffee in a silence that felt like the silence before artillery. "I've got something," Dex said without looking up. "Your ex-wife, Michelle Keller, née Brandt. Current address is a rental property in Cedar Falls, Oregon. Small town. Population 9,000. She's been there 18 months. Works at the county library." He turned the laptop around. "Riley's enrolled at Cedar Falls High. Sophomore." Cole stared at the screen. A map. A pin. A street name. The distance between him and his daughter reduced to coordinates in a 12-hour ride. "How did you find her that fast?" "I didn't. I called Monk." The name landed with weight. Monk was a former Army intelligence analyst who now lived in a basement apartment in Portland surrounded by servers and empty energy drink cans. He did contract work for people who needed information found quietly, skip traces, background checks, digital forensics. He owed the writers a favor from 3 years ago when Patch and Reno had shown up at a bar where two men were trying to break Monk's fingers over a gambling debt. The debt got paid. The fingers stayed intact. Monk never forgot. "He also found something else," Dex said. His voice had changed, flattened, the way a man's voice flattens when he's about to deliver news that will draw blood. "Silas Voss. You said he died in theater." "That's what the report said." The report lied. Monk pulled archived signals intelligence from a leaked DoD database. Voss was extracted by a private military contractor called Meridian Strategic Group 6 hours before the official firefight that supposedly killed him. He was relocated to a black site in Jordan, debriefed for 3 months, then released with a new identity. Dex took off his glasses. "He's been alive this entire time, Cole, and Meridian Strategic Group has a very specific client list: defense contractors, arms dealers, and a financial syndicate operating out of the Gulf Coast that launders money through shell companies in 11 states. Cole's jaw tightened so hard he could hear his own teeth. "There's more," Dex said. "Monk found a connection between the syndicate and your old unit's mission. The operation you ran in 2008, the one that doesn't exist on paper. You hit a compound that was supposed to be a weapons cache. It was a weapons cache. It was also a financial node. Ledgers, account numbers, routing codes, the entire money pipeline for the syndicate's operations in 3 countries. When your unit destroyed the compound, most of that documentation was lost." Dex paused. The silence was surgical. Most of it. Cole felt the room tilt. Not physically, perceptually. The way the world shifts when a piece of information rearranges everything you thought you understood about your own history. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that before the compound burned, someone extracted a ledger, a physical ledger. And according to the signals intelligence Monk found, that ledger ended up in the personal effects of a Marine who shipped a footlocker home before his last deployment." Dex looked at Cole with eyes that held no accusation, only the terrible patience of a man delivering a verdict. "Your footlocker, Cole. The one Michelle took when she left." The room was silent except for the hum of the overhead lights and the distant creak of pine trees bending in the wind outside. 5 men sat at a table built for decisions that couldn't be undone, and every one of them was looking at Cole. "I didn't know," Cole said. The words came out hollow, not defensive. Hollow. The sound of a man discovering that the wreckage he'd spent years walking away from was infinitely larger than he'd understood. "I packed that footlocker in 90 seconds in a room full of smoke. I grabbed everything, notebooks, maps, gear. I didn't sort through it, You just shipped it home and never opened it again," Dex finished. "Michelle took it when she left. She took everything." which means the ledger has been sitting in your ex-wife's possession for 15 years, and now someone has figured that out. Toller set down his coffee mug with a careful precision that belied his size. Voss isn't hunting the girl, he's hunting the ledger. The girl is how he gets to the ledger, Birch whispered from the corner. He photographs Riley, lets the information leak, waits for Cole to surface and lead him straight to the family. The logic was clean and cruel and absolutely correct. Cole had been played. The photograph wasn't just surveillance, it was bait. Harper overhearing the conversation at the motel wasn't an accident. It was designed. A frightened child carrying a message to a man who couldn't ignore it, triggering exactly the chain of events that Voss needed. Cole panicking, calling the club, mobilizing resources, and ultimately leading every one of them straight to Riley's doorstep. He was doing Voss's work for him. Then we stop, Cole said. We pull back. We don't go to Cedar Falls. You think that matters now? Dex's voice was quiet, almost gentle, which made it worse. If Monk found your ex-wife in 45 minutes, how long do you think it takes Voss with the resources of a military contractor behind him? He doesn't need you to lead him there. He's probably already watching the town. The photograph was insurance, a way to flush you into the open so he could track your movements and confirm the location he already suspected. Cole stood up so fast his chair scraped backward across the concrete floor with a sound like a short scream. He walked to the far wall and pressed both palms flat against the cinder blocks. The concrete was cold. He could feel the texture of every pore and imperfection against his skin, and he focused on that sensation because focusing on it meant he wasn't breaking something. Cole, Dex's voice behind him. I led them to her. Cole's words were barely audible, pressed into the wall like a confession spoken into stone. I made the calls. I activated the network. Every step I've taken tonight has been exactly what he wanted. You didn't know. I should have known. That's the whole point. Voss knows how I think. He served with my unit. He watched me operate for 8 months. He knows I can't ignore a threat to someone I love, and he used it. Cole's forehead touched the wall. He used an 8-year-old girl to deliver the trigger because he knew I'd never ignore a child. Birch stood. He crossed the room on silent feet. Combat medics learned to move without sound because their patients were often dying in rooms where noise drew fire, and stood beside Cole without touching him. Self-destruction later, Birch whispered. Daughter now. Cole pushed himself off the wall, turned around. His eyes were dry and his face was locked into the expression that men who'd seen combat recognized as the moment when emotion gets compressed into something harder and more useful, purpose. All right, he said. If he's already watching Cedar Falls, going in loud gets Riley killed. We need to get her out quietly, without Michelle knowing why, and without triggering whatever perimeter Voss has set up. Michelle will call the police the second she sees you, Toller said. There's a restraining order. Expired, Dex corrected, 2 years ago. She didn't renew it, but that doesn't mean she's going to welcome you with open arms. Last time she saw you, you were a wreck. She spent 4 years building a life without you in it. I know what she's spent 4 years doing, Cole said, and the edge in his voice was not anger at Dex. It was the sound of a man being forced to acknowledge a wound he'd cauterized years ago and told himself had healed. Cole's phone rang. Not the burner. His actual phone, the one he kept for club business, the one whose number was known to exactly 11 people. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered. Silence on the line. Not dead silence. Live silence. The kind where someone is listening, breathing, choosing their moment. Hello, Cole. The voice was mid-register, calm, measured, almost pleasant, in the way that a surgeon's voice is pleasant before he tells you what he has to remove. Cole hadn't heard it in 15 years, but the recognition was instantaneous, written into the part of his brain that cataloged threats the way a library catalogs books, permanently, precisely, and without forgiveness. Silas. Dex's head snapped up. Toller's hand moved to his waistband. Birch went perfectly still. You sound tired, Silas said. Long ride? How did you get this number? The same way I got the photograph. The same way I found the girl at the motel. The same way I know you're standing in a converted auto shop in Ashford with 4 of your friends, trying to figure out how to get to Cedar Falls before I do. A pause. You were always good at tactics, Cole. But strategy was never your strength. You react. It's your greatest quality and your greatest flaw. Cole's grip on the phone was white-knuckled. What do you want? I want what you accidentally stole from a burning building 15 years ago. A leather-bound ledger, brown, approximately 200 pages. Contains account numbers, routing codes, and transaction records for an organization that would very much like it returned. I don't have it. I know you don't. Your ex-wife does. Specifically, it's in a military footlocker currently stored in the crawl space beneath a rental house at 414 Birch Lane, Cedar Falls, Oregon. I could simply take it. I've had the location for 3 weeks, but the house has an alarm system. Your ex-wife is home most evenings, and a break-in would generate police attention that my employers prefer to avoid. So you need me to get it for you. I need you to facilitate a quiet exchange, the ledger for your daughter's safety. Simple, clean. No one gets hurt. Cole looked across the room at Dex. The old man's face was unreadable, but his eyes were communicating volumes in a language built from years of writing together through situations where the wrong word meant the wrong outcome. And if I say no, Silas's voice didn't change. That was the most frightening part. Then I stopped being polite about it. I have 3 men in Cedar Falls right now. One of them is parked outside your ex-wife's house. One is sitting in a coffee shop across the street from Riley's school. The third is in a motel room with a very specific set of tools and instructions that he is trained to carry out, whether I give the order or not. The calm never wavered. You have 36 hours. After that, my employer's patience expires, and the approach changes in ways that will keep you awake for the rest of your life. The line went dead. Cole lowered the phone. His arm dropped to his side as if the device weighed 40 pounds. The room was silent with the particular density of silence that follows the detonation of something that cannot be undetonated. He's got men on Riley's school, Cole said, on Michelle's house. Right now. Nobody moved for 3 seconds. Then everybody moved at once. Dex pulled out his own phone and started dialing. Toller was already heading for the door. Birch opened a cabinet against the far wall that contained things the club never discussed with outsiders. We ride tonight, Dex said. Cedar Falls is 11 hours. We take the back highways. No stops longer than fuel. He knows we're coming, Cole said. He told me exactly where he has men positioned. He wants us to come. Then he gets what he wants. The difference is what happens when we get there. Dex's voice had dropped into the register that meant decisions were being made at the level where consequences were accepted in advance. I'm calling the Oregon chapters. Red Creek, Bend, Tillamook. We'll have 20 men in that town by tomorrow afternoon. Dex, don't. The older man held up one hand. Don't tell me this isn't the club's fight. Don't tell me this is personal. The second you sat at this table and put that photograph down, it became everyone's fight. That's what this table is for. That's what the patch means. You don't get to carry this alone because carrying things alone is what put you in this booth tonight. Cole opened his mouth, closed it. The thing about Dex was that his anger looked exactly like his love, steady, immovable, and aimed directly at the thing that needed to hear it most. Toller came back inside. Bikes are fueled. Reno just called. Patch found camera footage from the gas station. The woman's car went east on Route 17 toward Ridgemont. They're following. Harper, Cole said. We'll find her, Toller said. Reno doesn't quit. Cole knew that was true. Reno Castillo had spent 20 years in special operations tracking people through landscapes designed to make tracking impossible. A scared woman in a rusted sedan on American highways was not going to outrun him. But the problem wasn't the woman. The problem was time. Every hour that passed was an hour Voss's men sat in their positions around Cole's daughter, watching, waiting, tightening a perimeter that would eventually close. They mounted up at midnight, 5 bikes rolling out of the compound in formation, Cole on point, Dex on his right shoulder, Toller and Birch flanking, and a prospect named Keel bringing up the rear. The engines shattered the silence of the empty road and filled the night with a sound that was not music but was not noise either. It was declaration, a statement of mass and velocity and intent that the darkness had no choice but to accommodate. The miles dissolved beneath them. Small towns flickered past like dying stars. Gas stations with one pump. Motels with vacancy signs that never turned off. Churches with parking lots emptier than their promises. Cole rode with the photograph pressed against his chest inside his jacket, his daughter's face against his heart, and with every mile the weight of what he was riding toward grew heavier. He'd abandoned Riley to protect her. That was the story he'd told himself for 4 years, that his absence was an act of love, that removing himself from her life was the sacrifice a good father makes when he knows he's the source of the danger. But somewhere on a dark highway between Ashford and Cedar Falls, with the wind tearing at his face and the engine hammering beneath him, the lie fell apart. He hadn't left to protect Riley. He'd left because staying meant facing what he'd become. Staying meant sitting across the breakfast table from a child who flinched when he raised his voice. Staying meant watching Michelle's eyes scan him every morning for signs of the man who woke up swinging in the dark, who couldn't stand in a grocery store without mapping the exits, who kept a loaded weapon in the nightstand 6 inches from where his 3-year-old daughter slept. He left because it was easier than changing. And now a dead man was sitting in a car outside his daughter's school because Cole had been too broken to stay and too proud to get fixed. They stopped for fuel at a truck stop outside Elko at 3 in the morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects over islands of concrete and gasoline. A long-haul trucker at the next pump looked at the 5 bikers and the patches on their cuts and decided his receipt could wait. He got back in his cab and pulled away without making eye contact. Cole stood at the pump watching the numbers climb and felt his phone vibrate. A text from Reno. Found the woman. Ridgemont Motor Lodge, room 9. Harper is with her, both sleeping, holding position outside, awaiting instructions. Cole exhaled. One piece recovered from the wreckage of this night. He typed back, "Stay on her. Don't approach until I give the word." And Reno, "If anyone else shows up at that motel, anyone at all, you get that girl out first. Everything else is secondary." The response came in 4 seconds. Understood. Dex appeared beside him, helmet under one arm, a gas station coffee in the other. He looked like he'd been carved from the same stone as the desert they were riding through, weathered, patient, unyielding. Birch pulled up satellite imagery of Cedar Falls on his phone, Dex said. Small town, 3 main roads in and out. Riley's school is on the east side, residential. Michelle's house is 4 blocks south. If Voss has 3 men positioned the way he described, he's got the whole family's daily pattern covered. He wants the ledger. He wants the ledger, Dex agreed. But he also called you directly and told you exactly where his people are. Why? Cole frowned. To apply pressure, to make sure I know the threat is real. Or to make sure you come in angry and predictable. Dex sipped his coffee. Think about it. He could have taken the ledger weeks ago. He said the house has an alarm, but that's a minor obstacle for someone with military contractor resources. He doesn't need you to get the ledger. He needs you for something else. What? I don't know yet. But when a man who manipulated an 8-year-old girl into delivering a message tells you his exact tactical positioning, he's not being generous. He's hurting you. Cole stared at the highway. The darkness beyond the truck stop lights was absolute, a void that swallowed everything and returned nothing. Somewhere in that darkness, 11 hours of road separated him from his daughter, and every mile of it was a mile that Silas Voss had already mapped. Then we do something he hasn't mapped, Cole said. Like what? I go in alone. Not to the house, not to the school. I find Michelle at work, the library, public space, neutral ground, no bikes, no cuts, just me. Dex studied him for a long moment. You haven't spoken to your ex-wife in 4 years. You're going to walk into her workplace and tell her that a ghost from your classified military past is surveilling your daughter because of a ledger she doesn't know she has, hidden in a footlocker she probably forgot exists. Yes. And you think she's going to believe you? No, Cole said. I think she's going to call the police, and then I think she's going to look at my face and realize I'm telling the truth, because whatever else Michelle thinks of me, she knows I would never come back unless the alternative was worse. Dex finished his coffee and crushed the cup in his fist. The boys from Red Creek and Bend will be in position by tomorrow afternoon. Until then, you're exposed. I know. If Voss is watching the town, he'll see you arrive. I know. And if Michelle won't listen, If she calls the cops and you get picked up before you can explain, Riley is alone with 3 of his men around her and no one between them. Cole looked at Dex. The older man's face was hard, but his eyes held something that wasn't hardness. It was the expression of a man who had watched too many brothers ride toward things they might not ride back from, and had learned that the only thing worse than watching them go was not being there when they arrived. "Then don't let me get picked up," Cole said. Dex held his gaze for 5 full seconds. Then he nodded once, a single downward motion of his chin that carried the weight of every ride, every fight, every silent night at the compound when 2 men sat on opposite sides of a bar and didn't need to speak because the silence between them was a language more fluent than words. "Mount up," Dex called to the others. "We ride straight through." 5 engines fired in sequence, each one a detonation of sound and intent that echoed off the gas station canopy and rolled across the empty desert like distant thunder. They pulled onto the highway in formation, headlights cutting through the darkness, and rode west toward a town that didn't know they were coming, toward a woman who didn't know she was in danger, toward a daughter who didn't know her father was 12 hours away and closing. And somewhere ahead of them, ahead of all of them, Silas Voss sat in a rented car on a quiet street in Cedar Falls, Oregon, watching the front door of a house at 414 Birch Lane, and waited with the patience of a man who had already won and was simply allowing the final pieces to fall into place. Cole's phone buzzed one more time as they crossed the state line. An unknown number. A text this time, not a call. 3 words. "Clock is ticking." And behind them, 400 miles east in a motel room in Ridgemont, Harper sat awake in the dark beside a woman who had passed out with a needle still within arm's reach, listening to the sound of motorcycle engines idling in the parking lot outside her window, and wondered whether the sad man from the diner had heard her, whether anyone had ever heard her, and whether the men with the snake tattoos would find her before morning. She pressed her back against the headboard and pulled her knees to her chest and made herself as small as possible. She was 8 years old, and she had already learned the most terrible lesson the world teaches its most forgotten children, that being brave doesn't mean someone is coming to save you. It just means you haven't stopped hoping yet. They reached Cedar Falls at 11 in the morning, under a sky that had turned the color of wet ash. Rain was coming. Cole could smell it in the air before the first drops hit, that metallic tang of moisture meeting cold earth, the sky holding its breath before releasing. The town sat in a valley between 2 ridgelines of Douglas fir, its main street lined with brick storefronts and American flags that snapped and twisted in the building wind. It was the kind of town that looked safe from a distance, the kind of town people moved to because they believed geography could solve the problems that psychology could not. Cole had left the others at a rest stop 12 miles east. Dex argued against it for 7 minutes, the longest argument they'd had in 9 years of riding together. But Cole held firm. 5 bikers rolling into a town of 9,000 people would register on every radar in the county, including whatever surveillance apparatus Voss had constructed. One man in a borrowed truck wearing jeans and a flannel shirt with the cuts and patches locked in a saddlebag was invisible. Toller had called a contact in Bend who ran a towing service. The truck was a dented white Ford F-150 with Oregon plates and a cracked windshield, the kind of vehicle that existed in every small-town parking lot in the Pacific Northwest without anyone ever noticing it. Cole parked 2 blocks from the Cedar Falls Public Library at 11:22. He sat in the cab for 4 full minutes, watching the street. A woman pushed a stroller past a hardware store. A teenager on a skateboard kicked his way toward the high school visible at the end of the block. 2 elderly men sat on a bench outside the post office arguing about something that required hand gestures. Normal. Ordinary. The mechanical rhythm of a town that didn't know it had a disease growing inside its bloodstream. He scanned for Voss's men. He didn't know what they looked like, but he knew what they would feel like. The slight wrongness of a person sitting too still in a parked car. The deliberate casualness of someone reading a newspaper they weren't actually reading. The particular quality of attention that comes from training rather than curiosity. He saw nothing, which meant either they were better than he expected, or they were positioned on Riley and Michelle specifically and hadn't extended their coverage to the library, or they were waiting for him to reveal himself. He got out of the truck. The rain started as he crossed the street, light at first, then harder. The kind of Oregon rain that doesn't build gradually, but arrives fully formed as if someone had turned a valve. By the time he pushed through the library's glass doors, his flannel was dark with water and his boots left wet prints on the carpet. The Cedar Falls Public Library was small. One main room with low shelves, a children's section in the back corner marked by a faded mural of animals reading books, a circulation desk near the entrance, and 3 computer terminals that looked like they'd been donated by a school district that no longer wanted them. Michelle was behind the desk. Cole stopped 3 steps inside the door. She hadn't seen him yet. She was processing returned books, scanning barcodes and stacking hardcovers with the efficient automatic rhythm of someone performing a task they'd done 10,000 times. Her hair was shorter than he remembered. Shoulder length now, lighter, threaded with the first traces of gray at the temples. She wore reading glasses she hadn't needed 4 years ago. Her hands moved with precision and care. The same hands that had once held his face in a hospital room in Bethesda and whispered that everything was going to be okay while both of them knew she was lying. She looked up. The barcode scanner slipped from her fingers and hit the counter with a sharp plastic clatter that sounded enormous in the quiet room. Her face went through 4 expressions in 2 seconds: recognition, disbelief, fear, and something else. Something that lived beneath the fear like bedrock beneath soil, something she tried to suppress and failed. "No," she said. "Michelle." "No." She held up one hand. Her fingers were trembling. "You don't get to be here. You don't get to stand in my library in my town and—" Her voice cracked. She pressed her lips together so hard they went white. "Get out!" "I can't." "Then I'm calling the police." The restraining order expired. "I don't care. I'll tell them you're harassing me. I'll tell them whatever I need to tell them to make you leave." Cole didn't move. He stood exactly where he was, 3 steps inside the door, rain dripping from his clothes onto the carpet, and made no gesture that could be interpreted as aggression or advance. He'd rehearsed this moment for 11 hours on the highway and still didn't have the right words because there were no right words. There was only the truth, and the truth was a grenade with the pin already pulled. "Riley is in danger." Michelle's hand froze halfway to the desk phone. Her eyes, hazel, sharp, the same eyes that had once looked at him with a love so complete it terrified them both, searched his face with an intensity that was not trust, but was its desperate cousin. The need to determine whether the man standing in front of her was lying or insane or telling the truth, because each possibility required a completely different response and the wrong choice could cost everything. "What did you say?" "Someone is watching her, right now. There are at least 3 men in this town who have been surveilling her school and your house for weeks. One of them is parked outside your home. Another is within visual range of Riley's school." "That's insane." "You have a military footlocker in your crawl space. Brown leather. You took it when you left. Inside that footlocker is a ledger, a financial record from an operation I was part of in 2008. That ledger can destroy a criminal syndicate worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The man who wants it is named Silas Voss, and he served with my unit before he betrayed us and disappeared. He faked his death. He's been alive for 15 years, and 3 weeks ago he found you." Michelle stared at him. Behind her, a library volunteer, a white-haired woman shelving books in the biography section, had noticed the tension at the front desk and was watching over the tops of her glasses with the careful attention of someone deciding whether to intervene. "You need to leave," Michelle said. Her voice was quieter now, not calmer, quieter. The voice of a woman who had spent 4 years building a wall between her daughter and the chaos that Cole Mercer generated simply by existing, and who could feel that wall beginning to crack. "I know you don't trust me. I know I gave you every reason in the world not to, but I need you to listen to me for 5 minutes, and then if you want to call the police, I'll wait right here for them. I won't run. I won't fight. 5 minutes." Michelle's hand hovered over the phone. The seconds stretched. Rain hammered against the library windows with increasing intensity, and the overhead lights flickered once, a momentary brownout that made the room dim and then recover, as if the building itself was uncertain. She lowered her hand. 5 minutes, and you don't come any closer." Cole told her everything. The diner, Harper, the photograph, the phone call from Voss, the ledger, the syndicate. He told it in flat, declarative sentences stripped of emotion, because emotion would sound like manipulation, and manipulation was the one thing Michelle Keller would never forgive. He gave her facts, dates, names, the clinical precision of a mission briefing delivered to someone who needed to understand the threat landscape without being told how to feel about it. When he finished, Michelle was gripping the edge of the circulation desk with both hands, her knuckles bloodless, her shoulders rigid. The library volunteer had stopped shelving and was openly staring. "The footlocker," Michelle said. "It's been in my crawl space for 6 years. I've never opened it. I thought it was just your gear, your old things. I kept it because—" She stopped. The reason she'd kept it was a sentence she wasn't willing to finish in front of him, and Cole didn't need her to finish it. The keeping itself said everything. "I need it," Cole said. "I need the ledger. If we turn it over to federal investigators, the syndicate collapses and Voss loses his reason to be here." "Federal investigators?" Michelle laughed, a short, brittle sound with no humor in it. When have federal investigators ever done anything except show up after someone's already dead? The bitterness in her voice ran deeper than this moment. Cole recognized it. It was the bitterness of a woman who had called the VA 3 times asking for help with her husband's PTSD and been placed on hold, transferred, given a callback number that rang into voicemail, and eventually told that the wait time for a new patient evaluation was 14 weeks. 14 weeks. A man drowning in his own mind, and the system's response was to schedule the rescue for next quarter. "I have people," Cole said carefully. "They're close. They can—" "Your motorcycle club." Michelle's voice went flat. "Your brothers. The men you chose over your family." "That's not what happened." "Well, that's exactly what happened. You came home from the war, and the only people you could stand to be around were other men who were just as broken as you. You chose the compound over our house. You chose road trips with men who call themselves riders over bedtime with your daughter. And now you're standing here telling me those same men are the solution?" Cole absorbed it the way he absorbed all blows, silently, with his weight centered and his jaw tight. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't entirely right either, but the parts that were wrong were nuances too delicate to argue in a library, while his daughter was being watched by men who would hurt her to access a ledger she didn't know existed. "Whatever happened between us, I'm not here about us. I'm here about Riley." "Riley doesn't know you." The words were delivered with the precision of a scalpel and the intent of a weapon. "She was 11 when you left. She cried for 3 months. She slept in your jacket until it stopped smelling like you. And then she stopped crying and stopped sleeping in your jacket and stopped asking where Daddy went. And that was worse, Cole. That was so much worse than the crying, because the crying meant she still believed you might come back, and the silence meant she'd accepted that you wouldn't." Cole's throat closed. He couldn't swallow. He couldn't breathe. He stood in a small-town library in a borrowed flannel shirt while rain pounded the windows, and his ex-wife took apart the architecture of his self-deception with the exhausted accuracy of someone who'd spent 4 years rebuilding what he'd destroyed. He deserved every word of it, but there wasn't time for it. "Michelle, please. We can do this, all of this, after Riley is safe. Right now I need you to take me to your house so I can get the footlocker, and then I need you to take Riley out of school and leave town until this is over." Michelle opened her mouth to respond. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She looked down at the screen. Her face changed. The blood drained from her cheeks in a single wash of pallor that left her skin the color of old paper. Her eyes widened. Her hand came up to cover her mouth, not a dramatic gesture, but a physiological one, the body's instinctive attempt to keep the scream inside. "What?" Cole stepped forward. "What is it?" Michelle turned the phone toward him with a hand that had gone completely still in the way that only total shock produces. On the screen was a text message from an unknown number. A photograph. Riley. Taken from across a street, walking between classes on a covered walkway at the high school. The image was from today. The same rain that was hitting the library windows was visible in the photograph, and Riley was holding a textbook over her head to shield herself from it. Below the photograph, one line of text: "Ask your husband about the ledger." Cole's vision narrowed. The library, Michelle, the shelves, the flickering lights, everything contracted to a single point of focus. His daughter's face on that screen, unaware, exposed, being watched by someone close enough to see the rain on her skin. "Give me the phone." Michelle pulled it back against her chest. They know where she is. Right now. They're at her school right now. I know. That's what I've been telling you. No. No. You don't understand. Michelle's voice was rising. The library volunteer had retreated behind a shelf. A patron near the computers looked up with alarm. You walked into my town and brought this with you. You brought them here. They were here before me. 3 weeks before me. Because of you. Because of your war and your secrets and your goddamn footlocker that I kept because I was too stupid to let go of the last piece of you. She was shaking now. Not with fear, with a fury so concentrated it was almost thermal. 4 years. 4 years I kept Riley safe. 4 years of no drama, no danger, no men with guns and motorcycles. And you... Michelle, stop. Don't you tell me to... Stop! Cole's voice was not a shout. It was a compression, a single syllable loaded with every decibel of authority that the Marine Corps had drilled into him, and it cut through Michelle's rising panic like a blade through silk. She stopped, not because she wanted to, because the sound demanded it. I'm going to the school, Cole said. Right now. I'm going to get Riley and bring her back here. Then we're going to your house for the footlocker. Then we're leaving this town, all 3 of us. She doesn't know who you are. The sentence hit him like a bullet, not because of its content, he already knew that, but because of how Michelle said it, with exhaustion, with resignation, with the particular weariness of a woman who had fielded her daughter's questions about her father for 4 years and had finally stopped being angry about his absence and started being sad about it, and the sadness was so much heavier than the anger had ever been. Then introduce me, Cole said. He walked out of the library into the rain. It was falling harder now. Curtains of water sweeping across Main Street, turning the gutters into rivers, and the sidewalk into a mirror that reflected the gray sky back at itself. He climbed into the truck and pulled out of the parking space with controlled urgency, not fast enough to draw attention, not slow enough to waste a single second. The high school was 4 blocks east. He drove past it once without stopping, scanning. A 2-story brick building with a front lawn and a flagpole and a student parking lot, half filled with cars that cost less than their insurance. The covered walkway where Riley had been photographed ran along the building's north side, connecting the main structure to a gym annex. He saw the car, a dark blue sedan, late model, tinted windows, parked on the street with a view of the school's main entrance. The engine was running. Cole could see the faint shimmer of exhaust rising from the tailpipe. The car was clean, too clean for this weather, this town, this street. Every other vehicle on the block was coated with the thin layer of road grime that came from driving wet mountain highways. This car had been washed recently and deliberately, the habit of someone trained to maintain equipment in operational condition. Cole passed the sedan without slowing. In the rearview mirror, he saw the driver's silhouette, still, watchful, positioned behind tinted glass with the patient immobility of a surveillance professional. He parked 2 blocks past the school and reached for his phone. Dialed Dex. I'm in town. 1 confirmed surveillance vehicle on the school, dark blue sedan, running engine, tinted windows, east side of the building. Oregon plates? Couldn't read them from this angle. We're 12 miles out. Give us 20 minutes. I don't have 20 minutes. Voss sent a photograph to Michelle's phone. They're escalating. The line hissed with rain and static. Cole, listen to me. If you approach that school with a hostile vehicle watching the entrance, you reveal yourself. You confirm Riley's identity to anyone who might have been uncertain, and you put yourself in a confrontation with no backup in a public school full of children. I know. Do you? Because the last time you went into a building alone against trained operators, 3 men died. They weren't my daughter. Dex was quiet for 4 seconds. Cole could hear the rumble of bikes in the background, the wet hiss of tires on a soaked highway. 20 minutes, Dex repeated. That's all I'm asking. 50. I'll push it. Stay in the truck. Watch the sedan. If it moves, call me. Do not... Cole, do you hear me? Do not approach alone. Cole hung up without promising. Promises were the things you made when you intended to keep them, and Cole wasn't sure of his intentions anymore. He was operating on something deeper than intention, on the primal subterranean imperative that drove every parent on Earth when their child was in the path of something harmful. It wasn't courage. It wasn't recklessness. It was biology. The same force that makes a wounded animal charge a predator 10 times its size when the predator approaches its young. His phone buzzed. He expected Dex. It wasn't Dex. It was Reno. Cole, we have a problem. The way Reno said it, flat, controlled, the voice of a man reporting contact under fire, made Cole's stomach drop through the floor of the truck. What happened? We approached Harper's motel room this morning. Door was open. Woman was gone. Needles on the bathroom floor, room trashed. Harper was sitting on the bed by herself. She'd been alone for at least 4 hours. Is she okay? She's fine. She's with Patch right now. He's feeding her pancakes at a diner down the road. But Cole, Reno's voice changed, dropped lower, as if the next words needed to be delivered below the threshold of the room's ambient noise. I talked to her. She told me more about what she heard at the motel, the two men, the conversation. What about it? She didn't just overhear them by accident. She was awake because one of them woke her up. He came to the truck bed where she was sleeping and shone a flashlight on her face. He looked at her. Then he walked away and started the conversation with the other man, loud enough for her to hear every word. The implication landed like a hammer strike on cold iron. Harper hadn't stumbled onto intelligence by chance. She'd been shown it. The man with the snake tattoo had deliberately verified that the child was awake and listening before conducting a conversation designed to be overheard. She was a delivery system, Cole said. It gets worse. I showed Harper a photograph of Silas Voss. Monk pulled an old military headshot. She said it wasn't him. The man with the snake tattoo was not Silas Voss. Cole's hand tightened on the phone. What? The man at the motel was someone else, younger, bigger. The snake tattoo on his neck was fresh, still healing. She said the skin around it was red and raised. Cole's mind was racing now, recalculating, restructuring the entire tactical picture he'd built over the past 20 hours. If the man at the motel wasn't Voss, then Voss had sent a proxy. Someone wearing a newly acquired tattoo designed to match a description that would eventually reach Cole. A visual signature meant to confirm identity at a distance without ever requiring face-to-face contact. There's one more thing, Reno said. Harper said the other man, the scared one, the younger one, called the snake tattoo guy by a name. She remembers it because it was unusual. What name? Keel. The world stopped. Keel, the prospect, the young rider Dex had assigned to bring up the rear of their formation on the ride to Cedar Falls. The man who was right now somewhere behind them on the highway, riding with the club, wearing a Black Horizon rider's prospect cut. Keel was Voss's man. Cole looked in the rearview mirror. His eyes moved to the wet road behind him, empty in both directions, rain cascading down the truck's rear window in sheets that distorted everything beyond it into shapeless, unreadable motion. Keel had been at the compound when Cole showed the photograph. He'd heard every word of the briefing, Riley's name, Michelle's location, Cedar Falls, the ledger, the footlocker, the address. He'd ridden with them through the night, positioned at the rear of the formation where he could observe everything and report in real time. Voss hadn't just manipulated Cole into revealing Riley's location. He'd planted a man inside the Brotherhood, and that man had been riding behind Cole for 11 hours, feeding Silas Voss every move, every stop, every plan discussed over gas station coffee in the dead of night. Cole's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard the plastic creaked. His vision tunneled. His breathing dropped into the combat rhythm. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. The mechanical override his body employed when the emotional circuits threatened to blow. He called Dex. The line rang twice. "Tell me Keel is with you," Cole said. Silence. Then, "He peeled off about 10 minutes ago. Said he needed fuel. Why?" "Because Keel is the snake tattoo from the motel. He's been reporting to Voss since the compound. Every word we said at that table, every plan, every detail, Voss has all of it." The silence on the line was the loudest sound Cole had ever heard. It lasted 3 full seconds and contained within it the complete recalculation of a man who had trusted his own judgment about people for 61 years and had just discovered that his judgment had failed in the one moment when failure was catastrophic. "I vetted him," Dex said. His voice was fractured. Not panicked, Dex didn't panic, but fractured. the way stone fractures under pressure that exceeds its tolerances. 6 months ago, background check, references from the Boise chapter. Everything checked out. Voss had 15 years and military contractor resources to build a legend. 6 months of a prospect patch is nothing. He was at the table, Cole. He heard Michelle's address. He heard about the ledger. I know. He's been gone 10 minutes. If he's on the phone with Voss right now, then Voss knows I'm already in Cedar Falls. He knows the Oregon chapters are mobilizing. He knows our entire tactical approach. Dex's breathing was audible through the phone, heavy, controlled, the breathing of a man pulling himself back from the edge of a rage so vast it could swallow everything. Where are you? Dex asked. 2 blocks from the school, watching a surveillance car. Do not move, we're accelerating, 8 minutes. Cole hung up and stared through the rain-blurred windshield at the high school where his daughter was sitting in a classroom, taking notes, maybe watching the rain, maybe thinking about whatever 15-year-old girls think about on ordinary Wednesday mornings. Friends, homework, music. The persistent question of who she is and who she might become. She didn't know that her father was 2 blocks away in a borrowed truck with his heart hammering against a photograph he'd carried inside his jacket for 20 hours. She didn't know that a man who had betrayed her father's entire unit was orchestrating her kidnapping from a rented car somewhere in this town. She didn't know that the footlocker in the crawl space of her house contained a document worth killing for. She was 15 years old and the world was about to collapse around her. And the only person who could stop it was a man she wouldn't recognize if he walked through her classroom door. The school bell rang, distant, muffled by rain and glass, but unmistakable. Students began pouring out of the building, and the dark blue sedan on the east side of the school started to move. The sedan pulled away from the curb with the measured acceleration of a driver who was not fleeing but repositioning, smooth, deliberate, the kind of movement that came from training rather than panic. It turned left at the intersection and headed north, away from the school, away from the stream of students pouring out of the main entrance with backpacks and umbrellas, and the loud, careless energy of teenagers released from a classroom on a rainy Wednesday. Cole's eyes swept the crowd. He found her in 4 seconds. Riley was walking with 2 other girls along the covered walkway, her textbook still held over her head despite the overhang, laughing at something one of them had said. She wore a green jacket and jeans and sneakers that were already soaked through, and she moved with the loose, unhurried stride of someone who believed the world was basically safe, a belief that Cole had sacrificed everything to preserve and that was about to be destroyed. He got out of the truck. The rain hit him immediately, cold and relentless, plastering his flannel to his chest and running in streams down his face. He crossed the street toward the school with long strides, not running, his eyes locked on Riley while his peripheral vision scanned every parked car, every doorway, every angle of approach that a trained operator would use to close distance on a target. Riley's friends peeled off toward the student parking lot. Riley turned toward the sidewalk, adjusting her backpack strap, and that's when she saw him. She didn't recognize him. Cole watched it happen. Watched his daughter's eyes pass over him the way they would pass over any stranger on a sidewalk, with the brief, disinterested assessment of someone cataloging and dismissing an irrelevant presence. He was 10 feet away, close enough to see the rain on her eyelashes, close enough to see the small scar on her chin from when she'd fallen off a swing set at age 6. He'd been the one to carry her to the car, her blood on his shirt, her tiny fists gripping his collar. She didn't know him. Riley. She stopped, frowned. The name coming from a stranger's mouth triggered the automatic caution that schools and parents drilled into children. Don't talk to strangers, don't engage, keep walking. She took a half step back. Who are you? 2 words that weighed more than anything Cole had ever carried, more than his rucksack in Fallujah, more than the flag-draped coffin he'd helped shoulder at Danny Vickers' funeral, more than 4 years of silence and distance, and the carefully constructed lie that his absence was a gift. My name is Cole Mercer. I'm your father. Riley stared at him. The rain fell between them like a curtain of static, and for 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then something shifted behind her eyes. Not recognition, not yet, but the precursor to recognition. The way you hear a song you haven't heard in years and can't name it, but your body remembers the rhythm before your mind remembers the words. No. She shook her head. My father left. My mom said I know what your mom said, and she was right to say it, but I need you to come with me right now. I'm not going anywhere with you. Riley's voice had gone hard. Not scared, hard. The hardness of a girl who had processed her father's abandonment and emerged from the other side not fragile but armored. I don't know you. You're in danger. There are men watching this school. You sound insane. Riley, please. A car horn. Sharp. 2 blasts. Cole spun. Michelle's silver Honda Civic screeched to a halt at the curb 15 feet away. The driver's door flew open and Michelle was out and running, her shoes splashing through puddles, her face a mask of terror and fury that Cole recognized from the day she'd packed their apartment. The day she'd loaded Riley into a car seat and driven away while Cole stood on the sidewalk watching his entire life disappear around a corner. Get away from her! Michelle grabbed Riley and pulled her behind her body with the ferocity of an animal protecting its young. She turned to Cole with eyes that burned. I told you to wait. The sedan moved, Michelle. It repositioned. That means they're adjusting because they saw something change. Mom? Riley's voice from behind Michelle. Confused, tight. Mom, what's happening? Who is this? Michelle didn't answer. She was scanning the street, her head swiveling, the instincts of a woman who had spent 4 years looking over her shoulder, finally vindicated in the worst possible way. She saw it now, the wrongness Cole had described. The clean car that didn't belong. The figure in a hooded jacket sitting on a bench across from the school's entrance who hadn't moved in the rain. The quiet pressure of being observed by people who were very good at not being seen. Get in the car, Michelle said. Both of you, now. They moved. Riley climbed into the back seat with the stunned compliance of a teenager whose world had just cracked open. Cole folded himself into the passenger seat, his knees pressing against the dashboard, his wet clothes soaking into the upholstery. Michelle reversed out of the spot and accelerated down the street with the controlled urgency of someone who had imagined this scenario in nightmares and was now executing the evacuation plan she'd rehearsed in her head for years. The house, Coley said. We need the footlocker. No. Michelle, I said no. I'm driving to the police station. The police can't help with this. Voss has resources that make local law enforcement irrelevant. By the time they understand the threat, he'll have the ledger or he'll have Riley. Don't say her name like you have the right. The words cut, but Cole absorbed them and kept talking because time was the one currency they couldn't afford to spend on anger. 4 blocks to your house, 2 minutes inside. I get the footlocker, we leave town, and my people handle the rest. Your people. Michelle's hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2, her knuckles bloodless. Bikers. Outlaws. The same men who dropped everything and rode 11 hours through the night because a child they've never met might be in danger. Yes, those men. Michelle turned onto Birch Lane. The street was residential. Single-story houses with small yards and pickup trucks in driveways and American flags hanging limp in the rain. Number 414 was third from the end. White siding, green door, a small porch with a wooden swing that swayed in the wind, and parked across the street, 40 yards east, a black SUV with tinted windows and the engine running. Michelle saw it. Her foot came off the gas. I've never seen that car before. Keep driving. Don't slow down. Go past the house. Michelle's breathing had gone shallow and fast, the hyperventilation of adrenaline surging through a body that had no combat training to channel it. She drove past 414 without stopping, her eyes fixed straight ahead with the desperate rigidity of a woman trying not to look at the thing that frightened her most. Mom, Riley's voice from the back seat. Quiet now. The hardness from the school sidewalk had dissolved into something younger, something that sounded like the 11-year-old girl who had slept in her father's jacket. Mom, I'm scared. I know, baby. It's okay. It wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. But parents lie to their children in moments of danger the same way medics lie to wounded soldiers. Not because the lie helps, but because the alternative is a truth too heavy for the person hearing it to carry. Cole pulled out his phone, dialed Dex. Where are you? 3 blocks south. We see the SUV. taller and Birch are circling the block. Michelle's house, 414 Birch. I need a 2-minute window to get inside and get the footlocker from the crawl space. The SUV has 2 occupants, driver and passenger. If they're armed, they're armed. Then you don't go in alone. There's no time for a full approach. Riley and Michelle are in the car with me. Every second we sit here is a second Voss has to tighten the net. Dex was quiet for 2 beats. Cole could hear the bikes, multiple engines, the distinctive rumble of Harleys in formation, close enough that the sound was directional rather than ambient. "We'll handle the SUV," Dex said. "You get 60 seconds from the moment we engage, not a second more." "Understood." "Cole." Dex's voice dropped. "Keel is in the wind. We haven't been able to reach him since he peeled off. Assume Voss knows everything. Approach the house like it's hostile." Cole hung up and turned to Michelle. "I need you to drive around the block and stop at the end of the alley behind your house. Keep the engine running. Don't turn it off for any reason." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to go inside your house through the back door, get the footlocker, and be out in 60 seconds. "And the car across the street?" "My people are handling it." Michelle looked at him. In her eyes was a war between everything she'd spent 4 years believing about Cole Mercer, that he was dangerous, unstable, a threat to the safe world she'd built for their daughter, and the evidence currently surrounding her. Men watching her house, surveillance photographs of her child, a threat so large that the man she'd exiled had ridden 11 hours through the night to stand in her library and beg for 5 minutes. "If anything happens to her, I will never forgive you," Michelle said. "If anything happens to her, I won't be alive for you to forgive." She drove. Cole directed her around the block to the alley that ran behind the row of houses. She stopped at the rear of 414, a wooden fence with a gate, a small backyard with a covered patio and a barbecue grill. Cole looked at Riley in the rearview mirror. His daughter was pressed against the back seat, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes wide and wet. She was looking at him with an expression that contained fear, confusion, anger, and underneath all of it, buried so deep that only someone who knew her face from birth could find it, a fragile, terrified recognition. She knew him, not his face, not his name, but something deeper, something cellular, something encoded in the shared architecture of their bones and blood, and the particular way they both narrowed their eyes against light. She knew him the way a river knows the mountain it came from, even after traveling 1,000 miles in the wrong direction. "I'll be right back," Cole said. He got out of the car and went over the fence in one motion, hands on the top rail, weight over, boots hitting wet grass on the other side. He crossed the backyard in 4 strides and reached the back door. Locked. He drove his elbow through the glass panel beside the handle, a sharp, contained strike that fractured the glass inward in a web of cracks. He reached through, found the deadbolt, turned it, and was inside. The house smelled like Michelle. Coffee and clean laundry and the faint trace of whatever candles she'd burned the previous evening. The kitchen was small and tidy. Dishes in a drying rack, a school calendar on the refrigerator with Riley's schedule written in Michelle's careful handwriting. Evidence of a life built from the wreckage of the one Cole had destroyed. Functional, organized, deliberately normal. He moved to the hallway, found the access panel to the crawl space in a closet near the front door, pulled it open. The space below was dark, damp, and tight. 3 feet of clearance between the floor joists and the packed earth, lit only by the gray light filtering through a foundation vent. He dropped down. The mud was cold against his forearms as he army crawled forward, scanning the space with his phone's flashlight. Boxes, old Christmas decorations, a broken vacuum cleaner, and there, against the foundation wall, the olive-drab military footlocker with CPL Mercer stenciled on the lid in faded white paint. He reached it, unlatched the clasps, opened it. Inside, his old utilities, folded. A pair of combat boots, cracked and stiff, letters he'd never sent. A photograph of Riley as a baby, creased and water-stained. And beneath everything, wrapped in a field jacket he didn't remember packing, a leather-bound ledger. Brown, thick. The pages yellowed with age and dense with handwritten columns of numbers, account codes, and routing information in a language he didn't read. He grabbed it, closed the footlocker, started crawling back toward the access panel. That's when he heard the engines. Not Harleys. Something heavier. The deep, aggressive rumble of modified SUV engines accelerating hard on a residential street. Then voices, shouting, and beneath it all, the unmistakable crack of something that sounded like a gunshot, but could have been a car backfiring or a door slamming, except Cole Mercer knew what gunfire sounded like, the way a musician knows middle C, and that was a 9mm round hitting something solid. He pulled himself out of the crawl space and ran for the back door. The alley behind the house was chaos. A second black SUV, identical to the one that had been parked across the street, had pulled into the alley from the north end and was now blocking the exit. Its doors were open. Two men were out, moving toward Michelle's Honda with the coordinated efficiency of a trained extraction team. One of them carried a weapon held low against his thigh, not raised, not aimed, but present. A statement of capability that didn't need to be articulated. Michelle had thrown the car into reverse. The tires screamed on wet pavement. She backed into a garbage can, sent it spinning, and then the car stalled. She was fighting the ignition, turning the key, her hands shaking so badly that the engine wouldn't catch. Riley was screaming in the back seat. Cole came through the back gate at a dead sprint. The first man didn't see him. Cole hit him from the side with a shoulder strike that drove both of them into the SUV's fender hard enough to dent the metal. The man's weapon skidded across the wet asphalt. Cole drove his elbow into the man's temple, once, twice, and the body went slack beneath him. The second man turned. He was faster than the first, younger, trained, his weapon coming up in a smooth arc that would end with the muzzle pointed at Cole's center mass. Cole closed the distance before the arc completed, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting with the leveraged precision of a Marine combatives instructor who had taught this technique to 100 recruits and could execute it in his sleep. The weapon discharged into the ground, a flat, sharp crack that echoed off the houses. And then Cole had the man's arm hyperextended and drove him face first into the pavement. The man didn't get up. Cole grabbed Michelle's car door. "Move over." "I can't." "The engine." "Move. Over." Michelle scrambled across the center console to the passenger seat. Cole dropped into the driver's seat, turned the key, pumped the gas once, and the engine caught. He threw the car into drive and accelerated toward the SUV blocking the alley. At the last second, he cut the wheel hard left and threaded the Honda through a gap between the SUV's bumper and a wooden fence. A gap that shouldn't have been wide enough, but was, barely, the mirror on the passenger side tearing off against the fence with a shriek of metal on wood. They burst out of the alley onto a residential street. Cole turned south, then east, then south again, running a counter-surveillance pattern through Cedar Falls' grid of quiet streets while rain hammered the windshield and Michelle gripped the dashboard and Riley sobbed in the back seat with her hands over her ears. His phone was ringing. He answered on speaker. "Cole, where are you?" Dex's voice was ragged. There was engine noise and wind and the sound of Toller shouting something in the background. "East side. Moving south. 2 hostiles down in the alley behind Michelle's house. I have the ledger. We engaged the SUV on Birch. 2 men. They pulled weapons when we approached. Birch caught a ricochet off a car door. It grazed his shoulder, but he's riding. We've got bigger problems." "Tell me." "There's a third vehicle. We didn't see it until it moved. White van. No plates. It pulled out of a side street and it's heading east, toward you." Cole checked the mirrors. Rain, empty streets, no white van. "Not yet." "There's more," Dex said. "The Cedar Falls PD just lit up. 2 cruisers heading toward Birch Lane. Someone called in the shots." "How long before they lock down the town?" "Minutes. If we're on bikes when they start stopping vehicles, we're done." Cole's mind was running calculations at a speed that only combat produced. Distances, timelines, choke points, escape routes, the probability matrix of every possible outcome weighed against the single variable that mattered more than all the others combined, Riley's survival. "The steel mill," Cole said. "What?" "The old Cascade Steel Works, south edge of town, closed down 8 years ago. I saw it on the map when we were planning the approach. Chain link fence, main building intact, multiple access points. We regroup there, off the street, out of police attention. And then what? And then we figure out how to end this." "Cole?" "Dex. There is no version of this where we ride out of Cedar Falls on open roads with police scanners active and Voss's people mobile. We consolidate. We use the ledger as leverage. And we end it. Dex was quiet for 3 seconds. In the background, the sound of Harleys, multiple, accelerating, the collective thunder of men who had committed to a course of action that had no exit strategy. Southside Cascade Steel, 15 minutes. The line went dead. Cole drove. Michelle had stopped talking. She sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap, her face drained of color, staring straight ahead with the 1,000-yard stare of a civilian who had just experienced the kind of violence that soldiers spend decades trying to forget. Beside her on the seat, where it had fallen from Cole's jacket during the fight, lay the leather-bound ledger, the object that had killed Marines and corrupted operatives and funded criminal enterprises across 3 continents and had been sleeping in a crawl space in suburban Oregon for 15 years while a librarian and a high school sophomore lived their quiet lives 6 feet above it. Riley. Cole's voice was firm but stripped of command, gentle, the voice he'd used when she was 3 and afraid of thunderstorms. Riley, I need you to breathe. The sobbing in the back seat didn't stop, but it changed, from the jagged, hyperventilated crying of panic to the slower, deeper rhythm of a body beginning to process what had happened. I know you're scared. You should be scared, but I'm going to keep you safe. That's the only thing I'm here to do. You left. Riley's voice was raw, broken, the 2 words carrying the accumulated weight of 4 years of unanswered questions. You just left. I know. You didn't even say goodbye. Cole's throat constricted, his vision blurred for a moment, and he blinked hard. Rain on the windshield, not tears. That was the lie he told himself, and it was a necessary lie because if he started crying right now, he would not stop, and his daughter needed a driver, not a confession. I didn't say goodbye because I didn't think I deserved to. That's not an answer. You're right, it's not. They drove in silence for 2 blocks. Then Riley's voice again, smaller now, the anger giving way to something more fragile. Are those men going to hurt us? No? How do you know? Because I'm sitting right here, and I'm not going anywhere. The Cascade Steelworks rose out of the rain like the skeleton of something enormous that had died and been left to decay. 2 main buildings, a processing plant and a rolling mill, connected by covered conveyors and surrounded by acres of cracked concrete and rusted rail tracks. The chain-link fence had been breached in multiple places by weather and trespassers. The windows were broken. The walls were streaked with rust that ran in reddish-brown rivers down the corrugated metal siding. Cole pulled the Honda through a gap in the fence and parked inside the rolling mill, where the roof was still intact and the space was large enough to conceal a vehicle from aerial observation. The building was massive, cathedral-sized, with 30-foot ceilings supported by steel columns and a floor of oil-stained concrete. Abandoned machinery lined the walls like mechanical tombstones. The rain drummed on the metal roof with a sound like 10,000 fingers tapping. 2 minutes later, the bikes arrived. Dex first, then Toller, then Birch, with his left arm hanging slightly lower than his right. The ricochet graze was bleeding through the bandana he'd tied around it. But he was riding, and riding meant functional, and functional was all that mattered. 2 more riders Cole didn't recognize pulled in behind them. Red Creek chapter, early arrivals from the mobilization Dex had called. They dismounted without introductions and took positions near the building's entrances with the automatic discipline of men who understood that perimeter security wasn't a request. Michelle got out of the car and stood in the gray light of the mill, her arms wrapped around herself, looking at the bikers with an expression that defied classification. These were the men she'd blamed for stealing her husband. The brotherhood she'd competed with for Cole's attention and lost. And now they were the only barrier between her daughter and a violence so organized it had resources to watch a high school in rural Oregon. Riley stayed in the car. She'd stopped crying. She sat in the back seat with her knees drawn up, watching through the rain-streaked window as men in leather and denim moved through the ruined cathedral of a dead steel mill with the quiet efficiency of soldiers preparing a position. Cole set the ledger on the hood of the Honda. Dex, Toller, and Birch gathered around it. Nobody spoke for a moment. They stared at the brown leather cover as if it were an explosive device, which, in a sense, it was. "This is what Voss wants," Cole said. "Account numbers, routing codes, enough to dismantle his employer's entire financial network. He opened the ledger. Pages and pages of handwritten entries, dense, meticulous, the work of an accountant who had documented every transaction in a criminal empire with the obsessive precision of someone who understood that records were power. "We turned this over to the feds," Dex said. "It's over." "It's not over until Voss is neutralized. The feds take months, investigations, grand juries, warrants. Voss can move in hours. If we hand over the ledger and Voss walks free, he comes back for Riley. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but eventually." "Then what do you propose?" Before Cole could answer, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "I see you've chosen the Cascade Steelworks." Silas Voss's voice was as measured as before, the calm of a man narrating events he had already predicted. "Interesting choice. Defensible. Limited access points. But you've made one critical error, Cole." "And what's that?" "You've concentrated everything I need in one location. The ledger, your daughter, yourself. You've given me a single target instead of 3. Cole looked at the entrances. The 2 Red Creek riders were in position. The building was quiet except for rain and the distant creak of wind-stressed metal. "I know about Keel," Cole said. "Your man in our club." "Keel served his purpose. He's irrelevant now." "What do you want, Silas?" "The same thing I've wanted since the beginning. The ledger. Bring it to the main gate of the processing plant. Alone. No weapons. I'll have Riley's safety guaranteed by my withdrawal from Cedar Falls within the hour. My employers get their property. You get your daughter's future. It's clean." "Nothing about you is clean." "Perhaps, but I'm the only option you have. The police are searching for a silver Honda and multiple motorcycles involved in a shooting on Birch Lane. Federal attention will follow within 24 hours. If you're still in this building when either arrives, your daughter becomes evidence, your ex-wife becomes a witness, and your motorcycle club becomes a criminal organization. I'm offering you an exit." Cole looked across the mill at Riley, sitting in the back seat of the Honda, her face visible through the window, pale, frightened, watching him with eyes that held no trust but also no hatred. Just a question. The same question she'd been asking in silence for 4 years. "Are you going to stay this time?" "1 hour," Cole said. "Main gate, processing plant." He hung up. Dex grabbed his arm. "You're not going alone." "I have to." "He'll kill you. He'll take the ledger and kill you." "Maybe. But if I don't go, he hits this building with everything he has. Riley is here. Michelle is here. I'm not trading their safety for mine." Dex's grip tightened on Cole's arm. The old man's hand was shaking, not with weakness, but with the restrained fury of someone who had been protecting broken men for 3 decades and was watching another one choose to break himself. "Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance," Dex said. "You go to the gate. You show him the ledger, and while he's looking at you, we come through the back of the processing plant and close the door behind him." Cole looked at the mill. The processing plant was connected to the rolling mill by a covered conveyor that ran along the east wall, an elevated walkway of rusted steel and broken grating that would allow men to move between buildings without being seen from ground level. "How many do we have?" 7, 8 if Birch can still shoot left-handed. "I can shoot," Birch whispered from the shadows. Cole looked at his phone. 47 minutes until the meeting. 47 minutes until he walked into the open and faced a man who had been manipulating every move for weeks, who had planted a spy inside the Brotherhood, who had used an 8-year-old girl as a messenger and a teenage girl as leverage, and who had the resources of a military contractor and a criminal syndicate behind him. He walked to the Honda, opened the rear door, crouched down so his face was level with Riley's. His daughter looked at him. Rain dripped from his hair and his clothes and pooled on the concrete beneath him. He was soaked and bruised and bleeding from a cut on his forearm where the glass from Michelle's back door had caught him. He looked exactly like what he was, a broken man who had spent 4 years running from the thing that mattered most and had finally stopped running. "Riley, I need to tell you something, and I don't have a lot of time." She didn't respond. She waited. "I left because I was afraid of what I'd become. Not because I stopped loving you. I never stopped. Not for one day. Not for 1 second. Leaving was the worst thing I've ever done. And I've done a lot of terrible things. He swallowed. I don't know if you can forgive me. I don't know if I deserve it. But right now I need you to know that I am standing between you and anything that comes through that door, and I will not move. Riley's eyes filled. Her lower lip trembled. She didn't reach for him. The distance between them was still too vast, too populated with years of silence and absence and unanswered questions, but she didn't pull away either. Just come back, she whispered. 3 words. The same 3 words she'd probably said to his photograph 1,000 times in a bedroom he'd never seen. Cole nodded. He closed the car door and walked toward the east end of the rolling mill, where the conveyor walkway led to the processing plant, where Silas Voss was waiting with the patience of a man who believed he had already won. The rain intensified. Thunder rolled across the valley, and inside the Cascade Steelworks, 7 men on motorcycles and 1 father with a leather-bound ledger prepared for the confrontation that would determine whether a 15-year-old girl would ever hear her father's voice again. Cole walked through the rain toward the processing plant with the ledger under his arm and every nerve in his body firing at a frequency that made the air itself feel electric. The conveyor walkway groaned beneath his boots, rusted steel grating, corroded bolts, the skeleton of an industrial infrastructure that had once employed 400 people and now served as nothing more than a corridor between 2 monuments to economic collapse. Below him, the factory floor stretched in every direction, a maze of dormant machinery, collapsed catwalks, and pools of rainwater that had leaked through gaps in the roof and gathered in the depressions of the concrete like dark mirrors reflecting nothing. He could hear them behind him, not the riders, who moved in silence along a parallel corridor 1 floor below, but the ghosts of the decisions that had brought him to this steel cathedral. Every wrong turn, every abandoned promise. Every morning he'd woken up in a motel room 2,000 miles from his daughter and told himself that distance was the same as protection. The main gate of the processing plant was a roll-up door the size of a 2-car garage, partially raised, rain pouring in through the gap and pooling on the factory floor in a spreading lake of cold water. Beyond the gate, the mill's front lot was visible, cracked concrete, rusted rail tracks, and a single black SUV parked 30 yards out, with its headlights cutting through the downpour like 2 pale, unblinking eyes. Silas Voss stood 10 feet inside the gate. He was smaller than Cole remembered. That was the first thing that registered, the disconnect between the enormous space this man had occupied in Cole's memory and the physical reality of him. 5'10", lean, a face that might have been handsome once but had been rearranged by years and violence into something angular and predatory. His eyes were the color of creek water in winter, pale, clear, absolutely empty of warmth. He wore a dark jacket over tactical clothing, his hands visible at his sides, and around his neck, partially covered by his collar, the edge of a tattoo was visible. Not a snake, Cole noticed. Something older. Military. The kind of ink men got in places they weren't supposed to be, marking operations that didn't exist. The snake tattoo had been Keel's costume. Voss had never worn one. "You look tired, Cole." Voss's voice echoed off the steel walls and came back altered, multiplied, as if the building itself were speaking. "You always did push too hard, even in theater. Remember that night outside Ramadi when you carried Vickers on your back for 3 miles because the extraction point moved? You almost died from exhaustion, and I remember thinking, this man doesn't know how to stop." "I'm not here to reminisce." "No. You're here to negotiate." Voss looked at the ledger. "Is that it?" Cole held it up. The leather was dark with rain, the pages swollen with moisture. "Account numbers. Routing codes. Every transaction your employers ran through the pipeline for 3 years, enough to dismantle the entire network." "May I see it?" "You can see it from there." Voss smiled. It was a small smile, controlled, the kind that never reached the eyes because the eyes were busy calculating things that had nothing to do with amusement. "You brought backup. I can hear them. Your men aren't as quiet as they think they are. The one with the prosthetic hand knocked a pipe fitting loose on the east stairwell about 40 seconds ago." Cole's stomach clenched, but he kept his face neutral. Voss was either bluffing or he had surveillance inside the building. Either way, the plan hadn't changed. Cole was the magnet. The riders were the jaw of the trap. The only variable was timing. "I have 3 men outside," Voss said. 2 more in vehicles on the access road. "But I'm going to be transparent with you, Cole, because transparency serves my interests right now. I don't want to fight. A fight creates noise, attention, forensic evidence. My employers want the ledger recovered cleanly. Bodies complicate clean recoveries. Then take it and leave. It's not that simple anymore. Your ex-wife has seen my vehicles. Your daughter can identify the men who approached her school. The 8-year-old girl, Harper, can describe the operative I sent to the motel. Witnesses are complications." Cole's blood went cold. Not from the rain. From the clinical, antiseptic way Voss used the word complications, as if the lives of a librarian, a teenager, and an 8-year-old child were logistical problems to be solved with the same dispassionate efficiency as a supply chain disruption. "They don't know anything," Cole said. "Michelle doesn't know what's in the ledger. Riley doesn't know it exists. Harper heard a conversation she can't contextualize. My employers don't operate on reasonable assessments of risk. They operate on zero tolerance." Voss took one step forward. "Which is why I'm offering you an alternative. The ledger, plus your silence, plus your family's relocation under new identities. I have the resources to make all 3 of you disappear. Not in the way that sounds threatening, but in the way that sounds like salvation. New names, new town, new life. You could actually be a father to your daughter. Isn't that what you want?" The offer hung in the air between them, glittering with the false beauty of something designed to be irresistible. A new life. A chance to start over with Riley. No past. No footlocker. No ghosts. Just a man and his daughter in a town that didn't know their names, building something from nothing, the way people had been doing since the first broken family decided that running was easier than healing. Cole looked at the ledger in his hands. He thought about the men who had died in that compound in 2008. 3 Marines whose names were on a wall in Washington, but whose faces lived only in the memories of the men who'd served beside them. They died because Silas Voss had sold their positions to the enemy for money that eventually flowed through the accounts documented in this ledger. Every number on every page was underwritten in blood. "No," Cole said. Voss's expression didn't change. "Think carefully." "I don't need to. You sold out my unit. 3 men died. Danny Vickers died because you gave their coordinates to people who turned a compound into a crematorium. This ledger is going to federal investigators, and when it does, your employer's network burns to the ground the same way that Compound did. The only difference is this time, the right people will be inside when it catches fire." The silence that followed was not the silence of consideration. It was the silence of a man whose contingency plan had just been activated, the plan that existed behind the polished offer, the one built from uglier materials. "I was hoping you'd say that," Voss said, and his right hand moved to his jacket. Cole threw the ledger. Not at Voss, past him. The heavy leather book tumbled through the air and landed on the wet concrete 15 feet behind Voss, sliding to a stop near a collapsed piece of machinery. It was a calculated move, instinctive, immediate, designed to split Voss's attention between the man in front of him and the object behind him for exactly the fraction of a second that mattered. Voss's eyes tracked the ledger. His head turned. Cole closed the distance. He hit Voss at full speed, driving his shoulder into the man's sternum and carrying them both to the ground in an impact that knocked the air from Voss's lungs and sent his weapon skittering across the wet concrete. They rolled. Voss was fast. Faster than Cole expected, his body wiry and conditioned, his combat training evident in the way he immediately transitioned from the impact into a guard position, his knee coming up to create space, his elbow driving toward Cole's temple. The blow connected. Cole's vision fractured into white spiderwebs. He tasted blood. His lip had split against his own teeth. But he didn't lose position. He trapped Voss's arm, drove his weight forward, and landed a short, savage punch to the ribs that he felt crack beneath his fist. Voss gasped, twisted, got a hand free and drove his thumb toward Cole's eye. A dirty, desperate move. The kind of technique taught in programs where the only rule was that the other person stopped breathing. Cole turned his head and the thumb raked across his cheekbone instead, tearing skin, leaving a streak of red. They separated. Both men rolled to their feet. Cole's breathing was ragged. His left ear was ringing from the elbow strike. Voss was holding his ribs, his face twisted in pain, but his eyes, those cold, pale eyes, were calculating. "You're slower than you were," Voss said through clenched teeth. "I'm angrier than I was." Voss lunged. His hand found a length of pipe on the floor, 3 feet of rusted steel, and swung it in a horizontal arc aimed at Cole's skull. Cole ducked. The pipe whistled over his head and struck a support column with a clang that echoed through the entire building like a bell. Cole came up inside the swing's arc and drove his knee into Voss's midsection, folding him in half, then grabbed the back of his jacket and slammed him face first into the column. Voss bounced off the steel and staggered. Blood was streaming from his nose, mixing with the rain that dripped from the ceiling above. He still held the pipe. He swung again, wilder this time, off balance, a swing driven by pain rather than precision. Cole caught the pipe mid-arc. The impact shuddered up his arm and into his shoulder, and for a moment both men held the weapon between them, faces inches apart, breathing each other's blood-tinged air. "You should have stayed dead," Cole said. He tore the pipe from Voss's grip and threw it into the darkness. Then he hit him, a straight right that connected with Voss's jaw and snapped his head sideways. A left hook to the body. Another right. Each blow was precise and heavy and carried the accumulated weight of 15 years of dead Marines and night terrors, and a daughter who slept in her father's jacket because it was the closest she could get to a man who had vanished. Voss went down. He landed on his back in a pool of rainwater, his arms splayed, his chest heaving. Blood flowed from his nose and a cut above his eye and the corner of his mouth. He was conscious but finished. The particular stillness of a body that had been pushed past its structural limits and was operating on nothing but the electrical impulse of a brain that hadn't yet accepted defeat. Around them, the processing plant erupted with the sound of boots on metal and concrete. Dex came through a side door with Toller behind him. The 2 Red Creek riders appeared on the elevated walkway above. Birch materialized from somewhere in the machinery, his left arm hanging at his side, his right hand holding a weapon pointed at the floor with the patient readiness of a man who would use it only if the situation demanded, but who was absolutely prepared for that demand. Voss's men outside never made it inside. Toller had handled the perimeter. Cole didn't ask how and didn't need to. The 2 operatives from the SUV were face down in the gravel lot, hands zip-tied behind their backs, their weapons collected and laid on the hood of their vehicle in a neat, almost respectful row. Cole stood over Voss in the rain-streaked light of the processing plant and looked down at the man who had killed his friends, destroyed his unit, and spent 15 years hiding behind the infrastructure of a criminal enterprise that had funded itself with the blood of better men. "You manipulated an 8-year-old girl," Cole said. His voice was quiet now. Not calm, exhausted. The exhaustion that follows violence, when the adrenaline recedes and leaves behind a body that feels like it's been hollowed out and filled with sand. "You woke her up in a truck bed and made sure she heard your man say my name. You used a child as a messenger because you knew I'd never ignore a frightened kid." Voss coughed. Blood spattered his chin. "It worked." "Yeah, it worked. You flushed me out. You tracked my movements. You planted a man in my club. You surveilled my daughter for 3 weeks, and now you're lying in a puddle in a dead factory with 3 broken ribs and no extraction." Cole crouched down. "Was it worth it?" Voss looked up at him with eyes that were no longer calculating. The calculation had been replaced by something raw. Not remorse, not yet, probably never, but the bleak acknowledgement of a man who had played every card in his hand and come up short. "The syndicate will send others," Voss said. "Let them. The ledger goes to federal investigators tomorrow morning. By the time their next team arrives, there won't be a syndicate to work for." Voss closed his eyes. The fight was over. Not just this fight, all of it. The 15-year operation, the hunt for the ledger, the elaborate architecture of manipulation and surveillance and human exploitation. It ended not with a dramatic final gesture, but with a man lying in dirty water in an abandoned steel mill, bleeding from the face, listening to the rain. Dex called it in. Not to the police, not yet. He called Monk, who called a contact in the FBI's Portland field office, who called a supervisor, who called someone higher. Within 90 minutes, 3 unmarked federal vehicles rolled through the gates of Cascade Steelworks, and a team of agents in windbreakers and body armor took custody of Silas Voss and his remaining operatives with the efficient impersonality of people who processed human wreckage for a living. Cole handed the ledger to a senior agent, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the weathered skepticism of someone who had spent decades being lied to by everyone and trusted nothing except evidence. She opened the ledger, scanned 3 pages, and her eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, the only indication of surprise she would allow herself. "This is real?" she asked. "It's real." "Where did you get it?" "From a crawl space in suburban Oregon. It's been there for 15 years. She looked at him, looked at the bikers standing around the factory floor in their leather and denim soaked with rain, some of them bleeding, all of them silent. She looked at the zip-tied operatives being loaded into federal vehicles. She looked at the battered Honda Civic parked inside the rolling mill, where a woman and a teenage girl sat waiting for someone to tell them the world was safe again. "I'm going to need statements from everyone," she said. "You'll get them. Tomorrow. Tonight would be preferable." "Tomorrow," Dex said from behind Cole, his voice carrying the particular authority of a man who had no official standing whatsoever but whose physical presence suggested that the word "no" was not something he encountered frequently. "These people need rest. The girl needs her mother, and the man standing in front of you just finished a fight that started 15 years ago. He can give you a statement when he's had coffee and dry clothes." The agent studied Dex for a moment. Something passed between them. The mutual recognition of 2 people who operated in different systems but understood the same fundamental truth, that the rules existed to serve the people, not the other way around, and that sometimes the right thing to do was bend the timeline to accommodate the human beings inside it. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Portland Field Office." She handed Cole a card. "Don't disappear." Cole almost laughed. Disappearing was the one thing he knew how to do better than anyone. It was the staying that had always been impossible. The federal vehicles departed. The rain began to ease. The sky, which had been the color of steel all day, started to lighten at the western edge where the sun was setting behind clouds that were thinning for the first time in hours. A pale, diffused glow spread across the valley. Not warm exactly, but present. The light equivalent of a held breath being slowly released. Cole walked to the Honda, opened the rear door. Riley was still sitting in the back seat with her knees drawn up, but her posture had changed. She wasn't compressed anymore, wasn't trying to make herself small. She was sitting upright, her eyes open, her face marked with the residue of tears, but no longer actively crying. She looked at him the way you look at a landscape after a storm has passed, cautiously, as if assessing what's been damaged and what's survived. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's over." She nodded. Then she did something that Cole had imagined 10,000 times in 10,000 motel rooms across 10,000 empty miles and had never believed he would actually experience. She reached for him. Not a hug. Not yet. She extended her hand across the distance between them, palm up, fingers open, a gesture that was simultaneously an offering and a test. A bridge built from the child's side of the canyon, fragile and provisional, capable of bearing weight only if the person on the other side understood that this was the most it could be right now, and that asking for more would break it. Cole took her hand. Her fingers closed around his. Her grip was strong, stronger than he expected. The grip of a girl who had spent 4 years learning to hold herself together, and who was now, for the first time, allowing someone else to help carry the weight. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The contact said everything that words would only diminish. Michelle stood by the car's hood, watching. She didn't interfere. Her face held an expression that was not forgiveness. Forgiveness was too large and too complex to arrive in a single moment in a ruined factory. But it was its precursor. The willingness to consider the possibility that the man she'd exiled was not the same man who had returned. Dex appeared beside Michelle. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't explain who he was, or what the club was, or why 7 men had ridden through the night and fought in the rain for a family they'd never met. He just stood there, solid, weathered, present, and after a moment Michelle looked at him and said, "Thank you." Dex nodded once. "That's what we do." It was the truest thing anyone said all day. They left Cascade Steelworks as the last light faded. The riders escorted Michelle's Honda to a motel in Bend. Not a roadside wreck, but a clean, well-lit place with a functioning lock and a night manager who didn't ask questions about the 7 motorcycles that parked in a protective semicircle around a silver Honda Civic. Dex paid for 3 rooms with cash and told the manager that these people were not to be disturbed for any reason short of the building catching fire. Cole sat in the motel parking lot while Michelle and Riley went inside. He sat on the curb with his elbows on his knees and his head bowed and let the last hour drain out of him, the way water drains from a wrung cloth. Slowly, painfully, leaving behind a fabric that was thinner than before, but cleaner. Birch sat beside him. The medic had properly bandaged his arm now. Toller had butterfly-stitched the graze at the steel mill with hands that were surprisingly delicate for a man his size. Birch pulled a cigarette from his jacket and offered one to Cole. They smoked in silence for 2 full minutes. "Reno called," Birch whispered. "Harper's safe. She's with him and Patch at a diner in Ridgemont. Ate 4 pancakes and fell asleep in the booth." Cole exhaled smoke toward the dark sky. "What happens to her?" "Reno's already working on it. The woman, her temporary guardian, has 3 outstanding warrants. County's going to pull Harper from her custody. Reno knows a family in Boise. Good people. Ryder's extended network. They've fostered before. She's 8 years old and she saved my daughter's life." Birch said nothing. He didn't need to. The weight of that sentence was self-supporting. The motel room door opened. Riley stood in the doorway, backlit by the warm yellow light of the room behind her. She was wearing clean clothes, something Michelle had packed in the Honda before they fled, and her hair was damp from a shower. She looked like what she was, a 15-year-old girl at the end of the longest day of her life, standing on the threshold between the world she'd known and the world that was taking its place. "Mom says you can come inside," Riley said. "If you want." Cole looked up at her. The parking lot lights caught the planes of her face, his jaw, Michelle's eyes, a combination that belonged to neither of them, and both of them, and was entirely, irreplaceably her own. "Yeah," he said. "I want." He stood up, crushed the cigarette under his boot, walked toward the door where his daughter was waiting. He didn't know what the next days would bring. There would be federal statements and legal proceedings, and the slow, grinding machinery of justice that would take the ledger and turn it into indictments and arrests, and the systematic dismantling of an empire built on blood money. There would be conversations with Michelle, difficult, honest, unsparing conversations that would excavate years of pain and silence and determine whether 2 people who had once loved each other could build something functional from the ruins. There would be therapy, for him, for Riley, maybe for both of them together. The kind of work that couldn't be done on a motorcycle or in a bar or at a table surrounded by men who understood your wounds but couldn't heal them. And there would be Harper. 3 weeks later, Cole rode to Boise with Reno and Patch. They pulled up to a small house on a quiet street where a couple named Davis stood on the front porch with the nervous, hopeful expression of people who had opened their home to a child they'd never met and were about to discover whether that child would let them in. Harper sat on the porch swing between them, wearing new clothes and shoes that fit, and an expression that Cole recognized from his own mirror on the mornings when the nightmares hadn't come, and the world felt, briefly, like a place where it was possible to start over. She saw Cole and ran. She hit him at full speed, her arms wrapping around his waist with a ferocity that nearly knocked him backward, her face pressed into his jacket, and for a long moment neither of them spoke because the language of survival is not verbal. It is physical. It is presence. It is the simple act of showing up for someone who has been taught by the world that no one ever will. "You came back," Harper said into his jacket. "I came back." She looked up at him. "Are the bad men gone?" "They're gone." "All of them?" "All of them." She nodded with the gravity of a child who understands more than any child should have to and who has decided, against all evidence, to believe in the possibility that the world contains people who keep their promises. She let go of Cole and walked back to the porch, where the Davis couple waited with a patience that was itself a form of love, the willingness to let a wounded child approach at her own speed, in her own time, without pressure or expectation. Cole watched her go. Reno stood beside him, arms crossed, his dark eyes following Harper as she climbed the porch steps and sat back down on the swing. "She's going to be okay," Reno said. "How do you know?" "Because she's brave enough to let people in. That's the hardest part. Everything after that is just time." Cole looked at Reno, a man who had spent 20 years as an army ranger and then another decade as a biker, who had seen the worst that human beings could do to each other and had responded not by withdrawing from the world, but by positioning himself between the world's cruelty and the people who couldn't defend against it. Reno Castillo had never, in all the years Cole had known him, explained why he did what he did. He didn't need to. His presence was the explanation. They rode back in the late afternoon, 3 bikes on an open highway under a sky so blue it looked manufactured. The wind was warm and smelled like pine and fresh-cut grass, and the distant mineral scent of a river running somewhere beyond the tree line. Cole rode with his visor up, letting the air hit his face, feeling the road beneath his wheels with the heightened sensitivity of a man who had recently been reminded that being alive was not a guarantee, but a gift that could be revoked at any moment without warning. He thought about the diner. Mabel's, Route 17. The cold coffee and the cracked vinyl booth and the frightened girl who had slid across the floor like a shadow and whispered 9 words that rewired his entire existence. He thought about Dex, who had ridden through the night without being asked because the patch on his back was not a decoration, but a covenant. He thought about Birch, who had taken a bullet graze and kept riding because stopping was something other people did. He thought about Patch, who fed a stranger's child pancakes with a prosthetic hand and considered it the most important thing he'd done all year. He thought about Riley. 2 days ago, she'd called him on the phone, the first voluntary contact she'd initiated. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She told him about a book she was reading. He told her about a road he'd ridden. Neither of them mentioned the steel mill or the rain or the moment in the parking lot when she'd reached for his hand. They didn't need to. That moment was the foundation now, and everything they built from here would stand on it. He thought about Michelle, who had agreed to let him visit once a month. "Start slow," she'd said, and for the first time in their shared history, the word slow didn't sound like rejection. It sounded like architecture. The careful, deliberate construction of something designed to last because it was being built correctly instead of urgently. Cole kept the photograph. The one Harper had stolen from the truck at the motel, his daughter mid-stride, unaware, alive. He carried it in the inside pocket of his jacket, where it pressed against his chest every time he leaned into a curve. It was creased and water-stained, and the colors had started to fade at the edges, and it was the most valuable thing he owned. Months later, the Black Horizon Riders compound in Ashford hosted a barbecue. It was Dex's idea, a gathering for the extended family that the club had accumulated not through recruitment but through the accumulated gravity of showing up when showing up mattered. Harper came with the Davises. She was taller now, and her hair was brushed, and she wore a jacket that fit. Riley came with Michelle, the first time Cole's ex-wife had voluntarily entered a space populated by the men she'd once blamed for stealing her husband. She sat at the long oak table in the main room, the same table where Cole had laid his daughter's photograph months earlier, and drank coffee and said very little and watched the men around her with an expression that was slowly, grudgingly, rearranging itself into something that wasn't quite trust, but was no longer its opposite. Riley and Harper sat together on the compound's front steps, sharing a plate of food and talking with the easy, immediate intimacy of 2 people who had survived the same storm and recognized in each other the particular kind of strength that only comes from having been afraid and choosing to act anyway. Cole stood in the doorway watching them. Dex appeared beside him with 2 beers and handed one over without a word. They stood together in the late afternoon light, and the compound was loud with voices and engine noise and the clatter of plates, and it smelled like grilled meat and motor oil and the leather of jackets hung over the backs of chairs. And it was not beautiful in any conventional sense, but it was alive, and alive was enough. "Someone asked me the other day," Cole said, "why a biker can't ignore a frightened kid." "What'd you say?" Cole watched Riley lean over and say something to Harper that made the younger girl laugh. A real laugh, surprised and unguarded. The laugh of a child who was relearning that the world contained things worth laughing about. "I told them that sometimes the smallest warning saves the only family you have left." Dex nodded slowly. He didn't smile. Dex rarely smiled. but the lines around his eyes shifted in a way that meant the same thing. He raised his beer, Cole raised his. The bottles touched with a quiet clink that was swallowed by the noise of the compound and the wind in the pines, and the distant rumble of a bike coming up the dirt road. Another rider heading home. The sun went down behind the tree line. The compound lights came on, mismatched bulbs strung along the fence and the roof line, casting an amber glow that softened the concrete and the chain link and the razor wire into something that looked, from a distance, almost warm, almost safe. Almost like the kind of place where broken people could set down the weight they'd been carrying and sit still for a while and let the silence between them say the things that words were too small to hold. Cole Mercer sat on the front steps of the compound with his daughter on one side and a beer in his hand and the photograph of a mid-stride girl pressed against his heart, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't want to be anywhere else. The engines cooled, the night settled, and in a small town in Oregon, in a house on Birch Lane where the crawl space was finally empty and the alarm system had been upgraded and the library books were stacked neatly by the door for tomorrow's shift, a light in an upstairs window went out as a woman who had spent 4 years building a wall decided, quietly, to leave the door unlocked.